This is a history of the Hastings Public Schools, told by Mildred Davey to Evelyn Drewes for the Hastings Historical Society. The slides are from the Langmuir and the Jane Pingrey collections. The information was taken from many sources, mainly from Jane Pingrey's material and the archives of the Hastings Historical Society, also from the many recollections from Davey's 38 years in the Hastings public school system. Okay, the first slide.
This is the first school in Hastings in 1838. The first school was located on the corner of Farragut Avenue and Ravensdale Road. The building was on the Moore estate, and it was known as the Little Red Schoolhouse. The records show that any child who could not afford to pay the modest fees was admitted free. The records also show that state aid for 1839 was $159.76, so we know that the fees were modest.
Next.
The old school with an addition. Two of the first students were William McConnell and John McClave. Mr. McClave recalled that Mrs. Richter, who lived across the street, kept the keys for the building and supplied the school with water. The first boy who arrived in the morning opened the school and started the fire in the stove. They recalled that the school was rickety. Next. This is the Fraser Union Free School. Crowded conditions showed the need for a new school, so in 1863, land on Main Street was purchased for $350, and a building was constructed of blue stone from the Ravensdale quarry at a cost of $10,000. There were 200 pupils and 3 teachers. In 1864, the school was dedicated and named in honor of Thomas L. Fraser, president of the school board. The school offered 2 years of high school, and there were 4 people in the high school. There was no kindergarten class in the new school. However, there was a kindergarten class which met in a tailor shop nearby. There was a road which ran between the school and the tailor shop. Millie Fredericks told in a tape recording that there was an outhouse which she described as a cute little building built of the stone like the new school.
We have a picture in the archives of the Historical Society of the first kindergarten class. Among the students were Millie Delanoy Fredericks, Vira Curry McNeese, Jack Zinzer, Albert and Christian Schmidt, Edith McConnell, William Rohrback. The teacher was Miss Matilda Truby. The Truby estate was located on Broadway on the present site of Hastings House. Millie lived on Main Street, now the site of Riola's real estate, and walked to school. Vira McNeese lived on Tompkins Avenue and came by horse and buggy. Her uncle, Wardy Tompkins, drove the horse and buggy, and on their way through Uniontown they picked up many boys who ordinarily walked. Some Ardsley students rode the old Putt, the Putnam Division train, to the Mount Hope stop and walked down from there. After Millie's house on Main Street came some vacant land, and it was a favorite sledding spot. It became known as Breakneck Hill. Next door to the school was the blacksmith shop. The school kids liked to watch Mr. McClave shoeing oxen. Okay. Next.
This is a quote from Thomas L. Fraser, president of the school board. He said, "The future of our children in our district depends entirely upon the education that they receive at our hands, and therefore we feel it our duty to provide for those willing to accept it an education that is thoroughly good in every respect, so that when they leave our school, they may be prepared for whatever station in life it may be their fortune to meet. This is taken from the minutes of the Board of Education meeting, Thomas Fraser, President of the Board.
That was what year again?
1875.
Next.
This is a list of textbooks. They were used in 1877, and from the record, a list dated October 9, 1877. Here are the books. Arithmetic, Greenleaf Series. Readers, the Franklin. Spellers, the Analytical. Geographies, Swinton Series, and Cornell's First Steps. These appear to be elementary textbooks. And for the high school, Algebra, Ray's Part First. Philosophy, Quackenbos. Astronomy, Kittle's School Course. Physiology, Cutter's First Book. Drawing books, Spencerian, Potter and Hammond, Payson, Denton, and Scribner's, Ellsworthy and Beers. And bookkeeping, Smith's and Martin's.
Quite ambitious, wasn't it?
I should say so, that particularly the astronomy. Here is the new addition to the Fraser Free School. In 1896, $7,500 was spent for a new addition to the Main Street Fraser School. This scene is looking up from the down the hill, up toward the west side of the school. And by 1900, the Board of Education was renting rooms in stores because the school was overcrowded. So, next, we have the Farragut School, Building 1. 1901, $60,000 was voted for the site and building of what is now known as the Farragut School. The site was on Farragut Avenue and a private road, which is now Hillside Avenue. It was thought that 20 acres was land enough for 50 years. There were 15 classrooms and an elementary auditorium. The Farragut School was named for Admiral Farragut, the first admiral in the United States Navy. In 1861, he moved to Hastings and lived at 60 Main Street. After the Battle of Mobile Bay, he was awarded $50,000 as a prize. He gave part of his prize money to help construct Grace Episcopal Church. The old Fraser Free School building was sold to the village for $1,000. Later, it was used as a public library. It is now the firehouse for the Hook and Ladder Company. William S. Okay. This is William R. Williams, the principal of the Farragut School, the first school building on the site. William R. Williams was the principal when they moved up to the new school. The school board proudly announced in 1906 that the school was growing better as well as larger. Since the first time in the history of the village, they could offer a full high school course. However, they deplored the number of dropouts and urged parents not to allow this. Encouragement for excellence in education was given by the Mrs. Jane and Grace Fraser in the form of prizes awarded at the 8th grade commencement to all those achieving 80%. The recipients were allowed to select their own prizes. Sets of literary classics, rings, and pins still exist in Hastings, although the prizes were discontinued in 1919.
Next.
This is an 8th grade preliminary certificate which was presented at graduation to Annie Hitchcock. The certificate shows that she completed the required tests to become a first-year academic student.
Next.
This shows the high school building, the present Washington building.
But the Washington building, which is the Washington building?
Over
Davey?
to the right
To the extreme
very
right.
extreme right. You can see the two chimneys. It was set back from the building from Farragut.
So we're still talking about the Farragut building in the main picture and the Washington building on the extreme right. Okay.
When the Farragut School had been completed only 6 years, Hastings began to feel the need for more schoolroom. The census of 1910 showed that 4,500 people lived here. After a lot of discussion as to whether Hastings School should be centralized, a proposition to spend $70,000 to build another school on this plot was voted down. But later, in the same year, the voters adopted by a vote of 112 to 110 with one defective ballot a proposal to spend $55,000 for the new school. This second school on the Farragut site, the high school as it was proudly called, was built in 1911. It had 16 classrooms, including 2 with sliding doors to make an auditorium.
Next.
This is Mr. H. Murphy, who was the principal. World War I brought work to Zinzer's and Anaconda and more workers to Hastings. At a homeschool meeting, Principal Murphy read a letter from President Wilson praising homeschool associations throughout the land and commending the country for maintaining its schools as usual through the war. Mr. Murphy urged members to support schools and parents to try to keep children in school rather than allow them to leave school for work.
Next.
This is probably the first woman member of a Board of Education. This is Mrs. E.D. Griswold, who was elected to the board in 1914. She formerly lived on Edgar's Lane.
Next.
This shows Board of Education members in front of the new junior-senior high school construction going on.
Do you think this is a dedication here, since we have the Reverend Thompson?
I believe it must have been, yes, because he wasn't a board member, but it probably was at the time that they were starting this new high school building.
Do we know any of these board members?
Oh, yes. Incidentally, these board members were the ones who interviewed me and hired me in 1928.
Right.
Okay.
Starting with the man with the hat, with the white hat.
That is Mr. John Whaley.
That's a familiar name in Hastings.
Well, they owned the cottage that is now owned by the Hastings Historical Society, where the archives will be housed.
And the man with the glasses.
The man with the glasses directly over his shoulder
To the right.
Is Reverend E.W. Thompson from the First Reformed Church.
And the next one with the paper.
That was Homer Balcom.
And next,
the hat is Judge Adolph Beavers. He was Grace LaFay's grandfather.
And there's a Beaver Street off of Cedar Street, named for Judge Beavers. And the last man in the first row
is Charles Delanoy, who was a school clerk.
And do you know the two men in the background in the second row?
The second row, the last one, is Roland Tompkins.
He has a company that he started.
He started a very famous company that built pipelines.
All right, next.
Well, this is a skating pond and cow farm on the site of Reynolds Field. This is an interesting story. As the school population grew, there was need for some recreation area. There was no place for baseball or for any sports of any sort. Maurice Scheckler owned a house on the site of what is now Reynolds Field. Nearby was a pond for skating and used as a wading pond in summer. Scheckler was a German who sailed a sloop from New York and set up a bone factory here down near the river. He manufactured sulfur and cheap distilled spirits. The house stood where the present tennis courts are located. Another part of the property was used for farming and grazing cows.
Yes, I remember that Mary Matichak said that her father grazed his cows down on Reynoldsfield. She's now Mary Regal.
That's
Next.
Right. These are the bleachers on the beginning of the Reynolds Field. Private citizens bought the farm in 1928, and they named it for Mayor Thomas Reynolds. Those bleachers didn't hold many kids. Spectators.
We don't know who the private citizens were that bought the land, and we don't know how much they paid for it.
No, there's no record of that at all. But they gave it to supposedly to the village.
All right. Next.
Reynoldsfield, as it is today, is village property, rented by the Board of Education and used by the Recreation Department.
Next.
This is Dr. John L. Hopkins, the superintendent of the Hastings Public Schools, who was hired in 1923 to reorganize the Hastings schools. He remained as our superintendent until 1951.
Yes, he hired me in 1950, and since I was from the South, he wanted to make sure that I had no prejudice left.
Isn't that interesting?
Next.
Might say you were one of the few people who wasn't from upstate,
Right.
Evelyn.
Right. Okay.
This is the new junior-senior high school. This shows, at the extreme right, the Hart House, which was at the corner of Mount Hope Boulevard and Farragut Avenue. In 1923, the school district bought two pieces of property adjoining the school plot. The Bumpus house was sold and removed, but the Hart House, on the extreme right, was used for offices for the superintendent, the board, the health and attendance offices, and also for homemaking classes and storage. The school was bulging. Basement rooms were being used. 65 children were on part-time. Plans were made to build a new junior-senior high school with a gym and auditorium on the Hart and Bumpus property. The voters decided $195 to $125 to build it.
When was that started?
That was started in 1926. The new junior-senior high school was begun in 1926, and it was occupied in 1927. Oh, I remember that period of while they were building the riveters there, and the kids just loving. They were fascinated by it, but the noise was so horrendous that you couldn't teach during the day because it was much too noisy. The new senior high school provided 16 regulation rooms and 7 special rooms. There is no question that that building will fit the needs of the senior high school for an indefinite period of years, said the superintendent in his annual report. He also announced that there were 25 in the graduating class and stressed the importance of character education throughout the school.
Next.
Oh, the high school.
This is the houses.
These are the Rosedale and Ravensdale houses. We call them Ravensdale because they were moved over. Some of them were moved over to the Ravensdale area.
They were moved from School Street.
Yes. All right. To meet the school boom, the voters in 1931 authorized a $650,000 bond issue for alterations and additions to the school building. Work began almost at once. Houses were moved off the School Street just beyond the high school. The land was dug up and a new wing of classrooms attached. At the same time, the Hart House was moved off the corner, and land there was excavated for a high building which connected the 3 earlier buildings, like the body of a starfish. This contained a cafeteria, a gymnasium, and offices. The cornerstone was laid in February of 1932. One could now enter the school door nearest the 5-cornered and go indoors to any part of the school if he didn't get lost. This is the high school on the site where the Hart House was moved.
Next.
This is a construction of the School Street wing. You
And
see
you
in the see that in the Evelyn in the background there, the
Is that
Washington.
the Washington
That's the
building?
Washington building.
We don't have many good pictures of the
No, it's
Washington
too bad.
building.
If anybody has any, we'd like to get them.
Okay.
So this is the School Street wing. It's north from School Street, followed almost to the end of the block. Not quite.
Next.
Next is the building plan. Now this gives you a good idea of the whole project. In 1901, Farragut Building. That was the first
building.
elementary school. All right. The next one is 1911. In the background, the Washington Building, which was called the new high school. Then next, in 1926, we have the junior senior high school that turns a corner and goes under Mount Hope. All right. In 1933, we have two sections, the School Street wing and the administration building, the big fort in the middle, connecting 1901 and 19, the Farragut and the Washington building.
While we have this plan, I'd like to tell you about the Washington building and part of the Farragut building. When I was hired in 1950, the basement of the Washington building was converted into 6 classrooms. It had been condemned, but the school population had grown so tremendously that 10 teachers were hired that year, and 6 of them were put in the basement of that room. Also, if you'll look over at the Farragut, down in the basement of that Farragut building, there was a long building at the very end of that building. It was down in the cellar, and it was known as the Boy Scout room. And we had all sorts of meetings there. The Boy Scouts met there, and it was a big area for any kind of meeting that we wanted to have. To approach that building, you went through a dark cellar. There was an exit that went out onto the playground on the hillside there.
I remember that.
But it was, you can see it easier by looking at this plan.
Get a good idea.
Get a good idea of the plan.
And when you say that later on, some of these rooms were condemned too. I remember taking visitor parents to see how dingy and it wasn't a pleasant place in which to teach. Certainly, it wasn't pleasant for the kids either.
This is the construction
I forgot to tell
of the
about
School
that.
Street wing. No, we're confused. Just a second now.
On that, going back to that previous one, you could see that how the Mount Hope School Street wing had a curve in it. The reason for that was because the State Department of Education would not approve the original plan. They said that the building would be too close to the street, Farragut Avenue. Farragut Avenue is a state highway, and it was anticipated correctly that there would be heavy traffic and the street would need to be widened, so the school had to be set back several feet.
Next.
Now we have the excavation for that administration building that was in 1933, that big fort building. That's on the left.
The building on the left is what?
That's the front of the Farragut building.
And the one on the right?
That is the entrance to the junior senior high school.
And that building will connect them.
This will connect, that
All right.
one.
Next.
All right, there's it is completed. There's the old fort. Oh, we disliked that so much. We thought it was so ugly. It was designed by Shreve, Lamb, and Harmon, who were the architects. That was the architectural firm that designed the Hastings Municipal Building and the Empire State Building. The administration building contained a cafeteria and a new gym in the basement, and the top floor was the elementary auditorium, which has now been condemned because it was too hazardous to use. And then there were elementary classrooms and eventually the art department. The building connected Farragut, Washington, and the junior senior high school. Here we have
This is still the
This is-
administration
yes. Oh,
building.
yes, I'm sorry.
But we were going to talk about this period around this time when the Great Depression came.
Yes, it was a period from particularly 1933 and 1934. Taxes were unpaid. The teachers returned 15% of their contract salary, and the Public Works Administration, which was known as the PWA, and the Work Projects Administration, known as WPA, it was very confusing. Those workers were used to paint the inside walls and do necessary repair work. The cost was paid for by the federal government. A local artist, Jack Warren, painted the large mural Westward Movement. He painted it in 1937. Mr. Warren lived across from school on Hillside Avenue. His son Jack and his daughter Betty were students in our school. This mural was commissioned for the west wall of the high school auditorium. It now hangs in the upper corridor of the middle school. This oil painting by Mr. Warren is listed among outstanding WPA works of art, and it has been photographed and included in a book researched and funded by the government.
Okay. Next.
Oh, I remember this so well. The early morning of July 4th, 1937, there was a mysterious fire in the Washington building, and the fire whistle blew, and I looked out and saw, because I was living on across from the playground, I could see what was happening, so I ran over. Most of the damage was to the roof, fortunately, which was removed, and that is why the Washington building now has a flat roof. Originally, it matched the hipped gable roof of the Farragut building.
Do they know what started the fire?
No, they never knew. It was like the fire today, but they didn't think it was that. It might have been, there was a lot of old paper and things stored up there which might have caused it. And then, of course, it was a very hot July 4th, incidentally.
Next.
Now, this shows the end of the school street. That was the future site of the gym. In 1957, the taxpayers voted to spend $24,000 for a new high school gym and $35 to renovate $35,000 to renovate the high school auditorium.
What year was that again?
That was in 1957. They voted to do all this construction, both jobs, in one in budget of some $59,000.
Next.
And this shows the construction of the high school gym being started. And in 1961, the new gym was completed and dedicated to Coach Leroy Cochran. We know it now as the Cochran Gym.
Next.
And the auditorium renovation is shown here. The new seats were provided in the auditorium. The stage was enlarged and up-to-date electrical equipment was installed.
Next.
This shows on the extreme right, you notice where there was a large window in the high school auditorium and other windows that were opened onto the backstage area.
That had been enclosed.
They were enclosed, and that was done at the time that the high school's auditorium was enlarged. In an annual report from Dr. Hopkins, he gave the summary of what education in Hastings means. Things the schools stand for are developed in the classroom, on the athletic field, in assemblies, in social studies, in the student general organization, it's now the student union, and the environment of school life. The dignity of each student is the outstanding value for which Hastings schools stand. The individual right to think, to express his opinion, to act, to go and come, and to associate with his fellow classmates, no matter what their nationality or group may be. The schools stand for responsibility to each student, to his home, community, and country. Responsibility is the very essence of democracy.
And some of our next slides will show some of these activities which he talked about.
Yes, we were able to pull out a few of those.
Right.
They're following our illustrations of outstanding activities. This is the band. It might have been from 1931, I'm not sure.
But there was an outstanding music department.
Yes, they had a wonderful chorus and a wonderful orchestra, a dance band that was very famous in the county.
Next.
And this is the undefeated, untied football team of 1946. The 1946 Yellow Jackets, champions of the league.
Do you remember any of those
Oh,
boys?
yes, I did. I taught them. I had them in class. The first row, first one from the left is Paul Kadachi. Fifth from the left is Jack Fisher. And the 11th on the right end is Marvin Kunze. No, right on the end, Marvin Kunze. Others are Pete DiCara, Lou Rapoli in the third row. In the final game with Dobbs Ferry, you know, there's always great rivalry
With Dobbs
with
Ferry.
Dobbs Ferry, which still exists today. Mo Kunze added 6 points by racing around the end to score. The final score was Hastings 20, Dobbs Ferry 6.
Next.
We had service organizations which did so much for the school grounds and school interior. This is the maintenance crew, a group that did gardening and planting and maintenance of the grounds under the direction of Miss Lloyd. She was a former chairman of the Social Studies Department and is she's now retired, and she's a former member of the Board of Education. The high school library is now the Eunice Ann Lloyd Library.
Next. This shows another picture of the maintenance crew. Beautiful flowers.
They always had the entrance to the high school building planted with marigolds and chrysanthemums, and these were the school colors, of course, green and gold.
Yes. Okay. Next.
All right, we had really great assembly programs. In 1946, high school was a host of students from Latin America and Canada. This was called the Herald Tribune Forum, and it was a forerunner of the present American Field Service, AFS, which was started in 1947. A junior girl, Betty Switzer,
Went to Ecuador.
yeah, she went to Ecuador, and in 1950, the first foreign student came to Hastings High School from Germany, Hilda George.
This picture what does this picture show?
Well, that's part of an assembly program sponsored by the General Organization.
With Kitty Morales from Costa Rica, Maurice Kirby from Haiti. I can't pronounce
L.C. LaFortune from Canada.
From Canada.
He was L.C. was the guest of Jared Myers. I remember that.
Yes. This is the famous candy bar picture.
Oh, yes.
I recognize some of the picture, some of the people in that picture.
Right.
What was the purpose of this?
Well, the kids wanted to send something to the high school or the students in Hastings, England, and they knew that they didn't get much candy, so they voted to send candy bars, and they sponsored the drive, and they get
they gave up their desserts.
They gave up their desserts. Oh yes, and they collected enough money for barrels full of Hershey bars. The boy in the middle, right next to the flag, is Ray Miller. He was a Graham School boy and president of the General Organization. The young lady in the hat was Sharman Douglas, and she was a granddaughter of the Colonel and Mrs. Zinsser, and her father was ambassador to the Court of St. James at that time.
That was 1947?
That was
1949.
Oh, yeah,
I'm sorry.
49. And, see, this was, the kids were involved in the war effort, and they wanted to do anything they could to help.
Of course, I recognize Dr. Hopkins, the very first
Right.
person on the left, and the
Next-
woman next to him is
Dr. North,
Doc-
elementary school principal.
okay. Was it North or Northway?
She was Northway.
I think it was Dr. Northway. The next one is Dr. Ross, and next to the flag
Is Ray Miller.
is the Ray Miller.
That's right.
Now, the other one that we recognize is the girl in the black jumper on the right-hand
That's-
side of the picture.
That is
Polly?
Polly Strong, Nancy Gross's sister, yes.
Right. Okay. In the background, there are some etchings, and there's a history to those etchings also.
Well, those were sent to us from Hastings, England, and they were done originals by a Hastings, England artist, and his name was Leslie Badham. Yes, Leslie Badham, and he was killed in World War. He was
Two.
yes. Those,
They were lost for a time,
Oh,
but they're
yes.
now in the possession of the Hastings Historical Society. Next.
Oh, this is the Hastings, England coat of arms. In return for the candy bars, the students in the Boys Technical High School in Hastings, England, made the coat of arms of their city, Hastings, England, and they sent it to us. The motto is Primus Inter Pares, translated from Latin, is first among equals. This shows a coat of arms being presented in an assembly program by Lady Frank, whose husband was the ambassador to the United States from Great Britain. It is being accepted by Emmanuel Butch Carolivanus, a Graham School boy, who was president of the General Organization in 1950. The cheerleader is Ann Scully, captain of the cheerleaders. And next to her is Dr. Ross, our high school principal. And the gentleman on the right is Mr. Paul Locker, president of the board.
It sounds like quite a friendship developed between Hastings-on-Hudson and Hastings, England, during the war years.
Well, it was a friendship which is carried on even now, because we know that members of the Historical Society have visited Hastings,
yes.
and I guess there's documentation for that.
Yes. Next.
This gentleman is Superintendent Williams of the Hastings, England schools. When Miss Menny, who was one of our former, she was physical ed director, the girls director, visited Hastings in the summer of 1949, Mr. Williams told her that this was being made by the boys. And he said, don't tell anyone, but the oak frame that the boys are making for the motto is made from tiny fragments from a bombed-out home in Hastings. Nothing could be used at that time, that was law, except to rebuild, even scraps of wood. But the boys wanted so much to have a nice frame, and they took small pieces from an ancient house and built this frame. You can see where it's attached very neatly, beautiful work. The lady is Miss Cummings, the head mistress of the girls' school in Hastings.
Next.
This is a picture of the honor roll, which is in the rear of the auditorium. And it's in honor of the 870 boys who fought in World War II. Most of them were graduates of a high school, and there also has the names of teachers who left to join the Army and Navy and Air Force.
And there were gold stars.
There are 38 gold stars after the names of the boys who were killed.
Next.
This is a montage showing in the middle row, to the left is Earl Keister. He was chairman of the math department and commander on Admiral Nimitz' flagship during the war.
And do we know the name of the high school
I
student who's
haven't
the
been
sailor?
able. No, I haven't been able to. If I went through all the yearbooks, I might be able to
But we
recognize
haven't.
him.
Okay. And on the right is?
Right is Jack Aarons. He was chairman of the art department, and he was a photographer in the Air Force.
And the bottom, I recognize
Oh,
what's
yeah,
happening there.
that's
We had bomb shelter drills.
Right.
And this is a picture of one of the bomb
Down
shelters.
in the lower corridor of the high school.
And what are the pictures, what do the pictures at the top signify?
Well, those were pictures taken of assembly programs. A World War scene, that's I suppose,
Depicting the
depicted
boys who were killed, the crosses.
crosses in the Flanders Field.
Right. Okay. Next.
This was done, it was a page from a yearbook. It was done by Mo Punzi, one of our best artists, and it lists some of the gold stars, the boys who were killed in action.
Do we know where Mo Punzi went from here? What did he?
He had an art
continue
career.
in
Oh
any
yes,
art?
and he is one of the top men in one of the advertising companies in New York. And his son finished Chicago Art School and is doing very fine artwork. So it's a family.
So this shows a partial list of the students
Yes,
who were
just because
killed in the war.
Yeah, there were only about 20 in this list, and there were altogether 38.
Next.
Well, here we
Right.
go again. By 1960, the school had become overcrowded. A proposition to exchange land with the village to build a school near Edgewood Avenue was defeated by a narrow margin.
And they tried the proposition again, and it failed again.
Mm-hmm.
But the third time, in which year?
1961 was carried by a large majority, because by this time a kindergarten class was housed over in the fellowship house of the First Reformed Church.
Next.
$100 a month.
This shows the construction of the Hillside School. There were 16 classrooms in the original building, and Dr. Alquist was the principal. And we were glad to be in that new school.
It was beautiful.
It was a beautiful new school with lovely grounds,
Quiet and peaceful.
quiet and peaceful.
And this is the completion of the first building of the complex. The
And that
first
was in
hillside.
1964. The Little League field is out in front, where you see the green grass. That's the Little League field. Next. And I did sneak in one picture of the kindergarten class,
I
because
loved it.
after we moved to Hillside and loved it so, we were there only a few years when we were pushed out again. Mary Axtell and I moved our kindergarten classes back down to Farragut School, and we were there for a few years until the addition was added to Hillside when we were moved again. I'm sorry, I didn't tell all the, there's more about Hillside. When the new wing was added, they added 18 new classrooms, and that was completed in 1971. Okay? We don't have a picture of that new addition to complete that.
Well, this is a part of our history that's very, in a sense, exciting. The Billy Burke sale. Here is a notice at the entrance to the Billy Burke estate that is for sale. Notice it's Mrs. Fort Ziegfeld under the Billy Burke name.
Okay?
Oh.
In 1967?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Billy Ziegfeld Billy Burke estate was purchased from Anaconda for $425,000. It had been sold before this to a Frenchman, Mr. Gerard. It could have been purchased in 1938 for $45,000, including the 22 acres of land. Before that, in 1933, it could have been purchased for $35,000. And each time it was voted down by the taxpayers. I'll never forget the auditorium filled, right, standing room only, and men tearing up the budgets and insisting that $35,000 was too much to pay.
Okay.
The house is now being rented to the Research Institute for $20,000 a year. Presently, 7 acres of this property is used for an athletic. I remember this, Evelyn. This is the original home of Billy Burke and Florence Ziegfeld. Their daughter Patricia had a lovely playhouse that was designed as a replica of Mount Vernon. And then the children loved to come and watch her pony, which was in the pasture that is presently the soccer field there at the corner of Mount Hope Boulevard and Farragut Avenue.
She had a lot of other
yes,
animals.
Yes, they had other. Her father brought them up, and they had a small zoo, really, which was fascinating. Many local residents were employed by the Ziegfelds, and of course we got stories about what happened at the Ziegfeld home and
it's time, yeah.
This is a winter scene of the Burke Ziegfeld house. Mr. Gerard, who bought the property, replaced the house, and it is the present home of the Hastings Center. Oh, this is an aerial view. This is a view from the roof of the administration building of the Hudson River and the Palisades. And
is that anaconda in the distance?
Down, it looks like the anaconda plant because it would be right about at that point. Yes.
Oh, and you were going to tell us about a bond issue?
Oh, in 1976, a $2 million bond issue was passed by the taxpayers for complete renovation of the middle school and high school.
Do you know what sort of renovation took place?
Well, yes, the cafeteria was moved from the location on the third floor down to the basement of Farragut building, the middle school. And the library was moved up to the third floor of the administration.
Where it still
where
is
it is
located.
now, yes, where it's presently the Eunice Ann Lloyd Library. And then the art department took over the old library and all of the classrooms across the corridor.
Greatly expanded, the art department.
The art department, yes.
Okay.
And this is an aerial view of the whole plant. It was estimated that the total value of the entire educational plant, the buildings and equipment in 1976 was $12 million.
It's now April 28, 1986, and you were in the school from what years, David?
I came in January of 1928 and was retired in June of 1966, a period of 38 years.
So this includes all of your stay in Hastings,
My memories of that, plus the decade following it when many of these changes have taken place.
As we talk about the school, are the problems very different today, do you feel?
Well, going over this, what we've been discussing here, certainly back in the early 1900s, they were worried about dropouts, school dropouts. Mr. Murphy, or Mr. Williams and Mr. Murphy both were concerned about that. Dr. Hopkins was concerned about the educating the total student, and that was not only academically, but he felt that we had to train them for citizenship and to accept their privileges and their responsibilities.
Dr. Hopkins was also very much aware of the makeup of the community, all of the different backgrounds of the people.
When he came here, there were 63 different ethnic groups in this community.
He was very much aware of that and wanted very much for all of us to work together with the different groups.
As I look back on it, he was really ahead of his time. He was an avant-garde person in terms of, public relations, civil liberties, and combining all of the ethnic groups. He had no regard for race, religion, or creed. It was just, you were Americans and you should be trained to be good Americans.
Right. Davey, this has been a great pleasure for me, talking with you and getting your recollections of the school and some of your memories. And
Well, Evelyn,
thank you
I've
very
enjoyed
much.
it, and it's nice to look back on these years with such pleasant memories and working with someone like this.
Thank you.